How much has changed in 90 days? Remember the eve of the invasion of Ukraine? Even after a massive troop buildup, and even as Vladimir Putin was questioning Ukraine's very right to exist as a sovereign state, it still beggared belief that war was actually imminent. What chance did Ukraine stand against the military might of a nuclear-armed superpower? How did both the Russian president and the West get it so wrong? 90 days later, through suffering and sacrifice, just how much have the tables actually turned? For all of Ukraine's grit, for all the Russian casualties, has the momentum swung the other way for good? After Mariupol, the Kremlin looks set to flatten parts of the eastern Donbass region. What's the endgame? More broadly, what will it take to stop the killing and destruction? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking about Ukraine's moment of truth, you could call it. Joining us from Kyiv, journalist and scholar Tatiana Ogarkova of the Ukraine Crisis Media Center. Thank you for being with us.
Hello.
With us in the studio, Maxim Boldarenko. He's an IT developer for a financial software company. And you were in Kyiv just before the war started, and you go back and forth. So we'll be hearing your thoughts on before and after, if you will. Retired Ambassador Jean-Michel Lacombe lectures at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po. You headed in a previous life the OSCE mission in Georgia in the late 1990s. Your latest book in French, The Business of Democratization and the Coup d'etat. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation, and you have on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Tatiana Ogarkova, where were you on February the 24th?
Yes, this was maybe the most dramatic day for myself and for the whole family. I was in Kyiv, more exactly in Brovary, my native city where we live, where I am now. It's unforgettable. So we woke up early in the morning at 5, approximately at 5, and there was a kind of very strange sounds of explosions not far away. Later, we learned that many explosions, many military bases were hit here in Brovary, some 10 kilometers from our home. It was a complete mess, because for sure we knew that Russia was preparing something, but until the very last moment, we were not convinced that that will really happen. So for people who don't have a real experience of war, I mean this full-scale war, it was something really dramatic and a real mess. And now what we were doing today, we were reading a lot of testimonies of people who were telling their stories. And we do understand that we are quite far away from that great moment, that dramatic moment, because now we see that this temptation, this effort to capture Ukraine just in 3 days, it failed. And we are talking today about the different situation, about the strategic failure of Russian Federation.
Well, we're going to talk about that in a moment, but let me ask you, Tatiana, because earlier we were speaking with our Kyiv correspondent, Gulliver Cragg, and you know, he was in Kyiv on the night, and he openly admitted to us that he himself just didn't believe Russia would actually invade. Were you of the same mind frame?
Yes, exactly. So we knew everything. And the problem is that we knew everything. We knew about the troops at the border. We observed how embassies were leaving Kyiv for 2 weeks at least before this day, before the 24th of February. But until the very last moment, we thought it was a kind of a virtual thing, not real one. So it seemed to us to be absurd, to be stupid to attack Ukraine. And maybe my first reaction, maybe the very first reaction when we understood that the war began, was that in any case, it will be the last war of Putin, and maybe the last war for Russia, for contemporary Russia, for Russia in its regime, because there is no way for them to conquer Ukraine. It was a kind of maybe irrational belief. Now a lot of people were talking about real, they fear that Ukraine can fall in 3 days. For us, it was something unimaginable, because we all knew that the whole nation will resist. And for us, it was the most stupid decision of Vladimir Putin just to attack our country, because we knew that we were strong enough to resist. And in any case, and I do hope that we'll observe it in next several months, the great failure of Russian Federation and Putin's regime.
Maxim Bodorenko, the first days there was the Ukrainians who desperately called the Germans for help, and they say, well, it's only going to be a few days. There was that famous line by Ukraine's president, I don't need a ride, I need ammunition. When that happens, did you think it was going to be swift? Did you?
Yeah, when the thing happened, actually, all Ukrainians were together supporting our president and asking for the same thing from Europe and from European Union to help us with weapons, and we didn't think that would be any shift in the war. But at that time, it's true, we thought the war would last like 2 weeks, maybe 1 month. All Ukrainians didn't know that it will last for such a long time. So yeah, we're still expecting this, and nothing changed since that, because it's been 3 months we are in the war.
And your family at the time leaves Kyiv and comes over here to be with you.
My family left Kiev in March, so yes, we realized that it will last in the middle of March, and we realized that it will not be good for us, because the bombs were falling over Kiev in the neighborhoods of Kiev where my family lived as well, and they felt it was a big danger.
And your father has since gone back.
Yeah, my father is still in Ukraine because he believes the support of Ukrainian economy is a duty of every citizen. So he wants to stay there, he wants to work, he wants to do his job, pay taxes. And today in Ukraine, most of the people who are coming back, they are coming back to work. It's not really well known, but today local economy is working, cafeterias are working, even bars are working. So in Kiev there is life going on. And all people work to support our economy today. So we need more of this support as well to keep this economy working and turning.
Jean-Michel Lacombe, February 24th, what was your prediction then?
Well, I was getting in touch, as you mentioned, my book, with my former OAC mission in Georgia. They were in Georgia, lieutenant colonel of major, and they had become generals. Some were Ukrainians and some were Russians. So I was absolutely sure that they were going to attack, because they were quite plain about it. The Ukrainian knew what was going to happen, and the Russian, with their telephone, still answered, even just before they reached their concentration positions. So when it happened, I was like everybody. I thought Ukraine is going to be crushed. But immediately the good news came, because in the Russian plan, the idea was to storm the 3 airports around Kiev, remove the government, and replace the government by someone else. And it was a complete flop. They were able only to get hold of Gostomel. All the other...
This airbase northwest of the city, and they only kept it for a couple of days.
Well, they were waiting for reinforcement from a column of panzer coming from north. And it didn't, that column got bogged down and everything went wrong. At the international airport and at the other airport, the Ilyushin were shot down, and the Russians suffered casualty, about 800 paratroopers slaughtered. So the good news was that the Ukrainians did their best, made the best use of the information that the Americans were providing them, because they were telling them they are arriving at this time and they are arriving there. So they had shock troops on the airports and reacted very efficiently.
And you were mentioning, Maxime, a moment ago how Right now, there's people soldiering on, getting back to their daily lives in the capital, and we've seen it this on what's been a mild spring Tuesday in Kyiv. In the opening days of the war, France's 24's Cyril Payen followed Artem. This was before February 24th. He was a real estate agent enrolled in the territorial defense forces and participated in the battle to repel the Russians in his hometown, the northern Kyiv suburb of Irpin. It's a report read by Jean-Emile Jamin.
This is magazine. This is trophy from Russia meat.
We are in Irpin, on the outskirts of Kyiv. Here, the Russian offensive has been driven back. For many, the war is over, but not for Artem.
Here, my best friend's mother was killed. She died buried in debris. And when they found her, there was only a part of her body.
This area of central Irpin was the scene of very heavy fighting in late March.
Coming back to places like this brings back terrible images. I hear the voices of all these people crying, calling for help, and I couldn't do anything for them.
In Irpin, the number of civilian victims is in the hundreds. Several of those who survived and managed to escape have now decided to return.
I want to continue to live here. I'll find a way, look for a new job. For now, we are trying to rebuild.
At the start of the war, Artem evacuated Anna, his wife, and son David. They too have just returned to Irpin.
He's changed. He's gotten tougher. He's always on alert, focused. But at the same time, I would say that he has become sentimental. I know that because of what he has been through. There are a lot of conflicting emotions in him. Unfortunately, when we are told life must go back to the way it was before, I also know within myself that it's impossible.
Are you afraid for your son still, or you think it's finished? It's okay.
No, it's not finished. Finished when every city in Ukraine, every centimeter of our country stay without Russian.
Tatiana Ogarkova, in that report, talking about how Artem, the soldier we followed 3 months ago, has changed, says his wife. Let me ask you a personal question. Are people able to process what's happened, or is it too difficult?
This is not simple for many people, because this is not an ordinary experience to experience the war. This is not theoretical for all Ukrainians. This is something very empirical, practical. Myself and my family, we spent the first week here near Kyiv in our countryside house, and I will never forget these missiles strikes just 10 kilometers maybe from us. There's such a terrible bombing when you hear, and you really are afraid for your life and for life of your children. I have 3 children, so we were afraid, and I will never forget the moment when we've seen that Russian army started to bombard civilian infrastructure in Kharkiv, the center of Kharkiv. And it was the very moment we decided to flee to the west of the country, where we spent 6 weeks, and then we were back in the April. And then it was very important for us to turn around to see Bucha. We went to Bucha, to Irpin, to Gostomel, and also to all these villages around our city, around Brovary. There were 27 villages under occupation, just 10 kilometers from the place I'm speaking now. So the war approached Brovary very close, in fact, 3 or 4 kilometers And when you follow the road, you see all these destructions, you see all these houses destructed, and all these people who suffered occupation, and you hear and you listen to their stories. You understand that in a way we were lucky, because we don't have this tragic experience of the direct contact with the war. But in a way, we all changed during these 3 months, I guess, all Ukrainians, because this is something existential for us, and unfortunately we understand that we had to continue this war, even if we hear some voices for us for a ceasefire, to stop the conflict, to stop shooting, to stop this tragedy. But it is extremely clear for us that we should fight against Russia now, to liberate all territories of Ukraine now, because if we don't, another war will start, and our children will be obliged to be in this war, unfortunately. So what happened in 2014 when we agreed, we didn't agree, but there was a silent consensus for Crimea and Donbass, a part of Donbass occupied, and then a bigger war started just 8 years later. So we all need, unfortunately, this bloody military defeat of Russia and the change of regime, because otherwise, and a long process also of recognition of all war crimes Russia committed on Ukrainian territory. It will be extremely difficult and extremely long process, but without that, we will just leave the country for our children, and our children will be obliged to have another war. And this is something we cannot just imagine. So, and I think that most Ukrainians will fight till the end, just to be sure that our kids will live in a peaceful country without this existential danger at the border.
Existential danger at the border. There is this dissonance or contrast, you can call it whatever you want, between the mood when you're in the Ukrainian capital 3 months on and when you're closer to the front line. There's the city that some are calling the next Mariupol, the eastern Donbass city of Donetsk, currently getting pummeled by Russian artillery. You can see it on the map there. It's the part, if you, when you look at Ukrainian territory, that's Ukrainian-held territory in the east of the country. That's the furthest eastward. And as you can see, this city, which is in Luhansk province, it's a city of more than 100,000 before the invasion. It's surrounded, Jean-Michel Lacombe, on 3 sides. And you were pointing us earlier to a video. We can perhaps show that video, and maybe you can talk a little bit about it, where we can see, this is the drive out of there, right?
Well, you can see a shell landing, and then the car is rushing again.
Cars rushing through debris. We hear the sound of
incoming shells on the left.
This is again that only road out of the
This
area.
is the only road out of Severodonetsk. So if they don't leave quickly, those 4 battle groups will be sacrificed. And this has happened before, Mariupol, Debaltseve. In Debaltseve, in the war 1 year ago, same problem. A finger poking in the Russian line, surrounded, and then it's very difficult to extricate Ukrainian troops out. So they fight to the very end. Mariupol, same. So we are getting ready for another Mariupol, or they have to pack up. In Debaltseve, they asked the OSCE if their retreating troop could mingle with lorries of the OSCE, which the OSCE did not allow and could not allow.
Because the OSCE is monitors.
It was monitoring the situation.
They're not allowed to act.
They are not allowed to help the Ukrainian troop to get out of this mess. So, but this time, same problem. Only one road. And as you can see, it is covered by Russian artillery. And they can fight. If they want to retreat, they will have to retreat, leaving their equipment behind. Or that it's a political decision. So far, the Ukrainian government has always asked its soldiers to fight to the end.
Right, and the Ukrainian Defense Ministry this Tuesday calling this an all-out offensive on the part of Russia, the biggest they've seen so far in the east of the country. What does that tell you?
Well, the Russians always prided themselves for first-class gunnery, and they are showing again that they can use. They are using their artillery like a sledgehammer, destroying everything. But I'm wondering what the decision the Ukrainian is going to take in for Severodonetsk, because either they retreat within a few hours, or they are caught, and they'll have to fight till the end.
Fight to the end, and can you make a tactical retreat? The question everyone's asking, of course, because you have on the side of the Ukrainians those weapons shipments that are starting to come in from all these Western countries. The question of time is on whose side at this point in the conflict?
Well, Napoleon used to say that God is on the side of the biggest battalion. So unless the Ukrainians have artillery or air cover and airstrikes, it's going to be difficult to extricate 4 tactical battle group, that is roughly 8,000 people, to get them out of
but
that.
That's in the very short term. But what about the longer term? Because they are going to get more military help.
Well, certainly they can rely more and more on Western help. Some people may like it, or some people may not like it, but we are slowly, Europe, entering a full-scale war. There was an agreement recently between the president of Poland and the prime minister or president of Ukraine, allowing Polish border guard to operate inside Ukraine. So that what that means that troops covered by Article 5 are now inside Ukraine, maintaining order. What kind of order are they maintaining? I think they are helping Ukrainian troops.
Maxim Bondarenko, we remember, again, I go back to those opening days of the war. Ukraine was asking at the time for NATO to enforce a no-fly zone. That did not happen. And for the reasons just spelled out by Ambassador Lacombe, is that it's a big decision. What were your thoughts at the time, and what are your thoughts now, listening to how things are developing?
So the no-fly zone, it's something we were all fighting for in manifestations all around the world. I think if it happened earlier, we could avoid this scale of the war, because even when
it would have meant war between NATO countries and Russia, effectively.
But when Ukrainians asked for no-fly zone at that time, they didn't ask to use actual soldiers from NATO. They asked to give us the systems, anti-missile systems, and give us the planes. And that was not done in the beginning. So now it comes progressively. It's hard to say if the time is definitely... we cannot say if time is on our side, because there are Ukrainian soldiers dying and there are Ukrainian civilians dying every day. But I think today, with this aid coming, Ukrainians will fight till the end, and we will not accept some kind of... The people in Ukraine will not accept some kind of compromise. I've seen the polls today. There are like less than 15% of people who are supporting the ceasefire with some kind of compromise with Russia on our sovereignty or our territories. So in any way, for Ukrainians, it's not a question of ceasefire or peace. It's a question of existence. So today, if we are getting these arms, the war will end quickly, and it will end by our victory.
All right. On the one hand, offering weapons, and on the other hand, the question of whether or not it can be, as we heard Artem in that report, regaining every centimeter of Ukraine. Last week, the New York Times published an editorial stating, quote, "The challenge now is to shake off the euphoria, stop the taunting, and focus on defining and completing the mission." Editorial goes on that as the war continues, Joe Biden should also make clear to President Volodymyr Zelensky and his people that there is a limit to how far the United States and NATO will go to confront Russia. And that echoes with remarks made Monday by 98-year-old Henry Kissinger, the former U.S. Secretary of State, speaking by video link to the World Economic Forum in Davos. He called for a return to what he said was the anti-status quo. Translated from Latin, it sounds a lot like he means the borders before February the 24th.
One hopes that they match the heroism that they have shown in the war with wisdom.
I hope the Ukrainians will match the heroism they have shown with wisdom. Tetiana Ogarkova, your reaction?
Well, I think that the public opinion is very important here for what Ukrainians feel now. And we've already heard Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, who was talking exactly about the liberation of all territories occupied by Russia from 24th of February. But the main objective is to get back everything. I mean, also Crimea and the part of Donbass which was occupied in 2014. We can discuss the means to employ to liberate these territories. It could be diplomatic way, because maybe at that very moment Russia will be weak enough to negotiate about that. So there will be no point to fight to get Crimea back. But in a way, this is a moment of truth where everybody, I mean Europe and the United States and all NATO countries, should understand that there is no return point. We cannot compromise with Russia now, because the price of compromise is extremely high. And we have shown already that the price is each time you try to calm the aggressor, to concede to the aggressor, as we did, as not only Ukraine, but I also speaking about Western countries who agreed silently about Crimea was not legally Russian, but in fact there were some sanctions, but that's also the end of the story. We forgot about that. So the price is that there will be another war. So if we don't stop Putin now, I mean not only Putin, but also this system, this imperialist system and an imperialist way of thinking of Russia today, Russia which he represents today, we are absolutely sure to have another war. And at that moment, we'll be speaking about the war in Europe, maybe in France and maybe in Germany. So it's much better to stop him now, to supply these arms, weapons, multiple launch rocket systems, which were asked today, for example, by our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dmitry Kuleba, is extremely important for Ukrainian counterattack. Today, Ukrainian's intelligence leader, Mr. Budanov, told in the interview to the press that Ukrainian is going to start our massive counterattack later in summer, maybe in the end of July and maybe in the beginning of August. And until the end of this year, 2022, we are to enter Crimea. So this is a Ukrainian plan, and we see no reason for Western countries not to be with us in this plan, because this plan will be a good security plan for Europe as well. And you are not to be afraid of Ukrainian victory. We hear many voices coming, even from French President Emmanuel Macron, who was speaking about saving face of Putin or don't humiliate Russia. We are convinced, and we have some experience with Russia, that this is not the best way to proceed with Russia. To face the aggressor, you have to, unfortunately, to
show force is what you're saying. Jean-Michel Lacombe, do you agree?
Well, I fully understand and sympathize with the Ukrainian position, but you must always remember that there is sometime hidden agenda with President Putin. He also, I'm afraid, wants to show that NATO is totally irrelevant. And if this goes on, he will do something, I don't know what, but he will surely do something like attacking Poland or sending a missile on NATO troops or specialists in Poland.
Is that really in his interest?
That's, I mean, he always, the Russian KGB or Siloviki always wanted, don't understand why NATO is still there. They have given up a lot of their former colonies, their friends, and so on, and NATO is still there. Warsaw Pact doesn't exist. It's considered as a permanent threat. They attacked Ukraine because they didn't want American paratroopers at a distance of 400 kilometers from Moscow. No, their problem, I think, is NATO. Can we show NATO that NATO is irrelevant and doesn't protect
But when
its member?
Tatiana says that the problem is 8 years ago, we thought we could live with the status quo, grin and bear it, when Russia annexed Crimea. But we've been shown that actually that just opened the door for more invasions. Is she right in saying that all of Ukraine has to be liberated now?
Even if Putin accepts to go back to square one, that is, what he conquered after 2014, this is no longer acceptable for him, because Russian population will see now all those casualties, all those people died, for what? For going back to square one? No. What Russia is, that above all, getting rid of NATO, but also what they'll want is to reduce Ukraine to a small state without access to the sea. So we can go on like that for quite some time, fighting and fighting. And I don't know if Europe will be able to stand that a long time, and what will be the economical consequence. Because if you, for instance, the Americans have asked the Saudi Arabia to increase oil production, to lower the price and make President Putin very unhappy with the price of oil going down. The answer was you can whistle. When you talk to the Indians are no longer...
Russian oil sales are down 30%, though.
Yes, but what they want is India is no longer in democratization business. They are not following and so on.
Maxime Bondarenko?
No, I think today's real solution for the problem without escalating militarily. The first thing to do would be to provide more embargoes on oil and gas with any provocation from Russian side, because I agree with Monsieur Lacombe that there can be some provocation, especially maybe Poland is too big, but especially in Baltic countries, that some missile can fall in Baltic countries, just to show that, look at that, the missile has fallen and NATO didn't respond, so NATO is not strong enough for us. And what people in Europe are thinking, what is Russian propaganda playing on, is that today, look at that, Putin has put on their knees the whole Europe because they cannot even put embargo after all that happens. And that's what Russian propaganda uses. And in Europe, including to discreditize the strengths of the NATO. So I think the response has to be according to that actions. Any provocation from Russians has to be followed by some good response from the EU, like some kind of partial or maybe full embargo, or the retrieval of some companies from Russia.
And they're getting closer to it, but the Hungarians still holding out when it comes to oil. At this point, the new French foreign minister says it could be a chance to find some kind of a pathway for that. When Emmanuel Macron gave a big speech before the European Parliament in Strasbourg, and he alluded to the Treaty of Versailles in 1919 when the Allies, the Entente, humiliated the Germans at the time and led then to World War II. Do you understand where Macron was coming from?
I think when Macron said that, he was giving allusion on the current situation, of course. But at that time, I think the situation is quite different between Germany and Russia, because today one of the most important points of Russian propaganda is that West is humiliating us. They don't want us to be a part of them. They refuse us. We wanted to go there, but they refuse us, and they want to destroy us. So I think today we shouldn't be afraid of humiliating them, because they already feel humiliated because of the government tells them they are humiliated since 30 years and even more. So there is no point to being afraid of humiliating them. There is a point to change this situation so that in future there will possibly be some people in Russia to negotiate with. But today the actions must be according to what is happening.
Tetiana Garkova, do people around you say that it's the Russians who need to be humiliated or Vladimir Putin who needs to be humiliated? Do they make the distinction, remembering that yours is a country where many of the people are native Russian speakers? Is there the sense that there is a permanent divorce between Russian culture and Ukrainian culture?
Yes, indeed. I would not employ the word of humiliation. We don't want to humiliate anybody, no Russians or any other nation. That's not the point. The point is to respond properly to an unjust aggression and unjust war, which Vladimir Putin and Russia's regime started against Ukraine. But coming back to your questions, we see polls in Russia, and we feel that, unfortunately, a huge part of the population supports Putin, even if we do understand that it is quite tricky during the war and in this kind of regime to trust these polls, even if we are talking about, for example, Levada Center, the most maybe famous and independent sociological company in Russia. Their figure was, if I'm not mistaken, 85% of support for Putin in March. So it's kind of a big part of the population. But I can easily imagine that not all Russians ally with this politics. And with time, with all these war casualties, we are approaching already 30,000 people, I mean Russian soldiers, dead in Ukraine. And it's a bigger number than what the Soviet Union lost in Afghanistan during 10 years. So it's a huge number. With all these sanctions, I mean economical sanctions, which will lead maybe during summer and maybe in autumn to a kind of a significant impact on the everyday life of Russians, I think that is quite a possibility for Russians to change their mind. And what we read in many sources, media sources, even from Russia, like in Medusa today, they are talking about that people are not, even in elites in Russia, are not so very much happy with this campaign. And we also know that quite few people knew about this decision to aggress Ukraine directly. Even the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Lavrov, was not informed about this military campaign. So I would say that for us at that very moment, if we are to distinguish between good Russians and bad Russians, the question is quite simple. We ask Russians, Crimea is Russian or Ukrainian? And if the response is that sure, Crimea is Ukrainian and Russia should cease to be a kind of this wounded empire, and with all this past, it tries to come back to the past. So this is good Russia. This is Russians we can talk with, and we can easily negotiate about our future, because we'll be neighbors for centuries to come. So there should be some people to negotiate, but we are to come back to justice, to punish everybody for war crimes, to restore our borders as it were in 91 at the time of our independence, to restore justice, to punish criminals, and there will be a possibility for peace.
Jean-Michel Lacombe?
Well, I'll try to get the spirit of what Mr. Kissinger said. I don't think Europe is ready to fight this war until the last Ukrainian. There must be a compromise at some time, because already Ukrainian army is bled white. They started the war with 70 tactical battle groups. Half of them were territorial troops. The rest was professional army. Now the territorial troops are fighting like professionals, but replacing them is getting more and more difficult. Russia has plenty of troops, plenty of equipment, and they can go on like that for ages.
They can go on like that for ages,
yes,
you think?
Certainly.
Because according to one French intelligence estimate, they may have lost up to 28,000 soldiers.
What about the Ukrainians? They have more or less the same casualty with a much smaller population.
A much smaller population, but a more determined one. You heard Tatiana saying this is an existential question for the country.
True. But again, is Europe going to accept this war going on at the border? The Americans are quite happy with it. We already have problem maintaining discipline in the EU about this war. And I think this will go on and increase. And I repeat, Europeans are not ready to fight until the last Ukrainian.
Maxime, let me ask you about your day job, because in the business world, and you're an IT developer, and are people ready for a long war?
Till now, I worked for French companies, so I wouldn't say somebody in business world would be happy with long war, and no one would be happy with their shares falling in price. So, of course, I think for European stability and for European continent, this war brings only the recession. And for the many people, except probably Baltic countries and Poland, who are directly impacted, I feel that many people I meet in the business world as well would be happy with any kind of ceasefire, because it doesn't concern them directly. But when I meet people from Baltic countries or from Poland, they know that probably they will become the next victim. And they know this better because they were part of Soviet Union before, and they know all
the Warsaw Pact,
all the atrocities that can be brought by Russia. Because this hatred between nations and the hatred that comes from Russia, it's not new. It's been 3 centuries that Russia oppresses Ukrainian language. Ukrainian language was forbidden more than 150 times during the Russian Empire, and the same happened with Polish language, maybe less times, and with Baltic languages. And it's like all these nations were oppressed since a long time, so we don't want this to be repeated again. So yes, it can bring a recession, but I think today it would be a good trade-off to stop probably buying the energy resources from Russia and have the prices of stocks and bonds and be able to have some stable situation in Europe, instead of continuing buying these energy resources and have this political instability that brings much more economic recessions. I will give
pay now or pay later. Unfortunately, we're out of time.
Yeah.
I want to thank you, Maxim Bondarenko. I want to
you.
thank Tetiana Ogarkova for being with us from near Kyiv. Ambassador Lacombe, thank you. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.